Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Today we're doing a series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, more specifically in this instance, the not quite finished but still pretty good Sharp X68000 core, and today I'm just doing a fun video talking about the ultimate Sharp X68000 build for MiSTer FPGA, because one day this core is going to be done and you're going to want to fully kit it out, because a real Sharp X68000 with all of the different modifications and the power supply repairs is just going to cost you a metric crap ton. We're talking over $2,000 with a blue SCSI in there, as well as everything else you might need. But we can get like 95% of the way there on MiSTer FPGA, utilizing some of the accessories that came with the Zuiki X68000 Z, which I did a video on a few weeks ago. I will leave a link in the description below. And to say that the Sharp X68000 has an awesome library would be an understatement. This thing was just an absolute powerhouse of the 80s and 90s as far as Japanese PC gaming is concerned, and it still holds absolutely everybody's attention. Before we get too much further though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. Well, we've had a Sharp X68000 core on MiSTer FPGA for years now, but it is not 100% complete. In some games you would be very fooled thinking that it was almost all the way there. In other games you're going to get some bad graphical glitches, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But just because the core isn't done doesn't mean there isn't a ton of fun to be had. You can play stuff like Akumaji Dracula here from start to finish, whether you want to use the FM synth sound or the MT32 Pi hat, which I'll showcase later in the video as well. So for every visual glitch on the core, there is something amazing like MIDI support or games that you've never played before that you definitely should be checking out. But to say that you have to have a lot of understanding of the system and how it works would be a little bit of an understatement here, especially if you want to go into Human 68K. There's so many different keystrokes and commands if you want to use this like a traditional Sharp X68000 that you're going to need to know, but you can of course just load up floppies or hard disk images and go from there. That is why the Sharp X68000 keyboard that comes with the Zuiki X68000 Z is such a fun accessory to have, because there is a toggle switch on the back that allows you to use it either on the X68000 Mini or as just a USB keyboard, and you're going to have so many more keys here, most of which seem to work on MiSTer FPGA, that are going to allow you to play the games and control the actual operating system a bit easier. Something like Version Angel here, definitely a keyboard only game. It's going to be a lot quicker than a controller, and the Sharp X68000 and Japanese PC keyboards are different than their US counterparts. There's going to be more keys, and there's going to be different symbols that you're going to utilize if you actually want to do any of the command line stuff in the X68000 core. Maybe not super important to you, but it is a nice added bonus, and pretty much every single game can be played with a keyboard, just using the keys like you would any other PC game. I'm not saying it's the best way to play the games in the world, but if that's what you want to do, get the real experience without a controller, that X68000Z keyboard is such a fun little resource to have around. You can pretty much use any USB Japanese keyboard. Just be aware that you do want a Japanese layout if you're going to get the most out of the core, if you're actually going to treat it like a real PC, and for the most part you can absolutely do that. Now as far as controllers are concerned, Zuiki did release this X68000 pad, and I'm going to tell you right now that it does work on MiSTer FPGA, but it is absolutely dog crap bad. The D-pad, the buttons are as bad as the original X68000 controller were, and it seems like Zuiki actually went for authenticity here, trying to make a controller that one-to-one replicated the original, and that means it is not very good in any way, shape, or form. If you want the same kind of layout, I would recommend the 8-bit DOE PC Engine controller. You get the D-pad, you get the 2 buttons here, you get 2 additional buttons as well for games that can support more than 2, and you also get that same form factor, but of course you can run any modern controller you want on this thing. Grab your PlayStation 5 controller, you'll have all the buttons you need for any Sharp X68000 game. Now for the most part they only utilize 2 buttons and a D-pad. You'll be perfectly fine with that, but a lot of times you may need the keyboard to actually start a game. Some games don't allow you to actually hit start with the controller. It is very strange, but there's so many amazing titles on the X68000 that we'll get into later in this video, and I've got a couple special MiSTer videos planned as well. But here's your first soundtrack sample on the FM side of things. Go ahead and listen for 45 seconds, I'll come back and tell you more about how to do the ultimate X68000 setup. Such fun soundtracks, and it sounds good to my ear as well because the sound component on the X68000 core seems to be pretty much buttoned up. But now let's talk about games that utilize more than a 2-button controller. There were some games on the Sharp X68000 like the Street Fighter releases that are going to be traditional 6-button just like any other version of Street Fighter would be. I know what you're asking to yourself, well, we have the Street Fighter cores on the arcade side of things from Hotego and his team. Why would we want to play on the Sharp X68000? And the reason is just because there is no fundamental reason to play these over the arcade originals or other versions of the game, except that it's fun and people are highly fascinated by the Sharp X68000. So if you want the best controlling version of this, you want to go to something like an arcade stick. I use the Neo Geo AES Pro stick that I've modded with my own custom parts. It goes into MiSTer FPGA and it works perfectly fine. So definitely consider bringing an arcade stick along for the party with the X68000 core. So many games are going to use more than 2 buttons that are arcade based, and having something that goes in via USB is going to be amazing. Now any USB arcade stick should work totally fine. This is just what I do because these things were on sale for the longest time and they're a great modification source, but you can kind of do whatever you want. But trust me, don't just bring a 2-button controller to the core or else you're going to end up struggling in some games. There is a decent amount of fighting games that were ported from arcades over to the Sharp X68000, and you're definitely going to want as many buttons as you could possibly get for those. Some of the Capcom stuff is going to be 6 buttons, some of the SNK stuff is going to be 4 button, but if you go with the 2-button controller, you're definitely going to be leaving some functionality on the table, because for like every 10 games that only use 2 buttons, there's one game that's going to use 4 or 6, and you're definitely going to want to utilize those. And even for games that don't use more than 2 buttons, something like Daimakiyamura here or Ghosts and Goblins, having an arcade stick is just going to give you better, more fluid control over Arthur in my opinion. For every single arcade port and arcade game on MiSTer FPGA, I always go to an arcade stick versus a controller so I have everything I need. And don't forget, you are still going to need a keyboard to select some of the games, especially if you go with those hard drive images where you have to load them up, and some games can utilize mouse on the X68000 core as well. Now I'm not saying you need the Zuiki X68000 mini mouse to be able to do this. Any mouse will work with the core like it will work with any other core, but there are a lot of fun games that utilize a mouse, point and click adventure games, visual novels, and everything else, and those are things that you're definitely going to want to use a mouse for, because if you use the D-pad or directional buttons on a keyboard, it just has a more stilted feel to it. There's not a ton of games that need the mouse, but it's definitely something you want to keep in reserve. It's going to help you out a lot. But leave me a comment down below and tell me, what's the last game you played on the X68000 core? I would be curious, because there's so many incredible titles that just seem to work exactly the same as the actual X68000 PC. Something like Final Fight, if there's any difference between the original computer and the MiSTer core, I would be hard pressed to actually be able to find it. But for every game like that, there's going to be other games that seem like they're working totally fine until you stumble up against some big visual glitch. No games seem to crash, nothing seems to fail that hard, but you'll see here as this boss sprite comes in, it is absolutely going to be 100% corrupted and mangled compared to what it normally looks like. So just remember that the Sharp X68000 core is not done, but that does not mean you can't have a lot of fun with it. And of course, if you don't already have one, I can't recommend enough picking up an MT32 Pi hat for both the X68000 core as well as the AO46 core. There's so many amazing games on the X68000 that have MIDI support, and even though the FM synth is going to sound incredible, you get even better audio out of the MIDI Pi hat. And of course, I'm segueing into the second audio sample. Listen, and I'll be right back. Absolutely incredible sound, and this was just a little bit of a fun video to show you how much fun you can have on the X68000 and some of the weird accessories you can bring along for the ride. And honestly, every time I say something's unfinished, somebody comes along and updates it and makes my voiceover relevant, and that is what I'm hoping happens here today. I'm trying to tempt fate because I really want to see the X68000 core finish in 2025 so it can be the ultimate way to play the system. But short of that, we are done. If you have any questions or comments, so leave them down below and tell me your favorite X68000 game. Bye bye.